Good morning. Such a pleasure to have you all here. I sure do hope you enjoy the holiday today and go forth and celebrate the greatness of what we mean when we say we are a free and independent people. Unleash your faith. That's going to be our series for the next 3 weeks, this week and the 2 following. And it's growing right out of what we just completed, where we asked you to be rooted in faith, to root your lives, to ground yourselves in the kingdom of God, not in the kingdom of this world, but in God's ways and God's desires and God's wants. But now for these next couple of weeks, as we listen to the scriptures, we're going to hear that that also has to be something that spreads out and has to be, if you will, taken out of the containers and spread all over. So unleash your faith. I remember I've had a privilege many times to guide pilgrims along pilgrimages. And it's a real blessing and it's a privilege for me to be able to do that because I encounter a lot of different people of faith. But there was one that does stick out in my mind. Many, many years ago, I was just a new priest. I was only a priest like 2 years. And there was this young man in the group. And from the moment we met him, it was in Italy. And from the moment I met him, I could just tell that he had a bit of a chip on his shoulder. One of those young people that, every time you tried to talk to him or share anything or do anything, he was just like, oh, yeah, okay, whatever. You could feel that he just wasn't really that into what we were doing. And yet he traveled all along with us. He kept coming to all the holy places with us. We were traveling through the countryside and going to so many different places. And everybody in the group was supporting him and encouraging him. But you could just still sense throughout that there was a resistance within him, just a holding back, if you will. And so we were making the tour, and we were coming around now, finally arriving in Rome. Now, if you've ever made it to Rome, Rome is a very interesting city. It's not, it's weird. It's just constantly buzzing and moving and people and things and all this great art around you and all these different things. And Rome, in and of itself, is one of those kinds of cities that just has its own charm to it. But as we were making our way, we now walk into St. Peter's Square. And if you've ever walked into it, the cameras just don't do it justice. There's just this beautiful structure right in front of you that you can look at. And as you walk closer, it just is so impressive, and you just keep moving. Well, we were moving, and we had to make our way around the side so that we can come up to the top step and make our way into the basilica itself. Now, they don't use the main doors a lot of times, so you come in from the side, so you really can't see inside the basilica until you actually get in and walk up a little ways. And so as you're walking up, all of a sudden, there in front of you is the nave of St. Peter's, and you can see the baldacchino and all of this beauty, and all of a sudden I glance over my shoulder, and there's that young man on his knees, weeping. And I went over to him, and I said, "Are you okay?" He said, No, I'm fine. I'm fine. Just give me a moment." And I said, "Okay." And I saw him just looking around and looking up and taking it in. And so he finally came over and he says, "Listen, I didn't expect this, but when I walked in, something rushed over me. And as I looked up, all of a sudden I saw this beautiful structure, and the Spirit just came upon me, and I was so overwhelmed, I just dropped to my knees." And for the rest of the trip, he was one of the most active, joy-filled, just trying to take it all in pilgrims. It was just, to see the change was just incredible. And all of that came from his experience of beauty. So many of us so often, we just have fallen into, I guess, a rut of Catholicism. A lot of us we've done it, we've been there, we've seen it. It's interesting because so many of us, like I grew up at a very interesting time to be a Catholic. I was born in the 60s, my faith was coming to its own in the 70s, and I was out in the world in the 80s. And that was, trust me, you all remember it, many of you at least, and except for you don't remember because you're so young, but it was just a strange time to be a Catholic because all of a sudden we went from, these grand, beautiful masses and liturgies and art everywhere to what Bishop Barron calls beige Catholicism. If you've ever listened to any of his podcasts or his talks that he does on evangelization, he talks about how we started building these buildings in Catholicism with these beige bricks. And everything was just beige and plain and nondescript. And, and even a lot of the churches, when you walked into them, They were doing what we lovingly referred to in the seminary as renovations. They were renovating churches. Taking out all the altar rails and changing things around and covering up walls and doing all of these things. So much renovation that was going on. And all of these things were just turning some of these beautiful structures into plain, beige, boring, banal structures. And I think that was to our fault, because what we were doing is we were taking away the beautiful, the beauty. And I think it's such a critical thing. St. Peter's wasn't built in a day, and those who made sure that St. Peter's was built were those who really truly had a faith and a love and really wanted to do this. The artisans that were involved, the different art and the different things that went into it, were all those who were trying to bring glory to God. And even though so many would look at it and say, oh, this is such an expensive place, and why do you have to... This was given by those who wanted to hand the faith on to others in such a way. And in the 70s, I have to say, the faith really wasn't handed on to me, because by the time the 80s came, I really wanted very little to do with the church, because for the most part, the church had become bland and what I want to say, horizontal. We were so overemphasizing the people that we forgot it was about God. It was about what God had done and how God had been so great, and his bringing salvation and sending his son, and all those wonderful tenets of our faith that seemed to just get pushed to the side. And all of a sudden, in what we now would like to refer to in that Greek way, in a very Promethean way, we made ourselves even defiant of God, that we'll fix it all ourselves. We'll do this on our own. We don't need God anymore. And that just made the faith very beige. And a lot of what was being given to us, especially when I was young, was just a very banal, Jesus was a nice guy kind of thing. I say all of this as a lead-in because a lot of this is what becomes the layers, if you will, around us. And a lot of this is what begins to feed our own faith life. So many Catholics will come up to me. So many people will come up to me and say things like, oh, my children don't go to church. Oh, my neighbor fell away from the faith. Oh, so many people I know no longer really practice the faith. And I have to say, well, yeah, I could see that coming because so many of us just go through the motions. We don't get excited about being a Catholic. We don't get excited about Christianity. There's nothing beautiful sometimes when we come amongst the assembly. It's all just that beige kind of boring life. I mean, even how many people will say, oh, I don't get anything out of Mass. Not even the Eucharist, not even the grace. We can say those things, but what they're really saying behind that, what really is there is, I went in and I wasn't touched at all. I wasn't moved at all. And that a lot of times in Catholicism is to our detriment because we are, if you will, ground zero of the beauty of God. It emanates and ought to emanate from our faith, from us, from those of us who are here. And yet I believe so many of us, we just get into the Catholic rut. I just keep going to church. I just keep showing up. I'm not moved in my prayer. I'm not excited when I come in. I don't see, I come in, I've seen this so many times. And we just get into that Catholic rut, that beige, if you will, that when someone else will come in, they're not really all that excited either because, well, let's face it, we're not all that excited. So often I've gone into some churches that I had remembered were so beautiful, and I walk in and I'm like, they've become so nondescript, so just boring. And I think that is something we need ourselves to start addressing because layer after layer after layer has kind of put us all into a little cocoon, if you will, and has contained Catholicism within the four walls of the building, say. That it's not going to be anything out of here. And let's face it, we were even taught very, very well back in the 70s that the one thing you don't do when you go and talk with people is you don't bring up two things, politics and religion. And what do? We still talk politics like crazy, but none of us want to talk religion. And I believe that's because we're not convicted, we're not convinced, we're not excited as much as we are sometimes about our politics. My dear brothers and sisters, this faith is beautiful. You don't have to be an eloquent theologian to be a faithful person to Christ. You don't have to be like a Thomas Aquinas or any of the great theologians that we've ever seen in our history to be a good evangelist and a disciple of Jesus Christ. Jesus was collecting around him a bunch of fishermen. And he had a bunch of people around him that were not the bright bulbs of his society. He wasn't collecting up the greatest. He was collecting a lot of the ordinary. And what we're going to see next week is he's going to send them out. Even though he's leaving his own hometown in defeat, even though he was kind of beaten and thrown out of the town, saying, who is this guy? That's part of what happens to us. Our familiarity and our routine and our rut begin to say, oh, I'm not really all that moved. And then we start to fall deeper and deeper into that banality, and we start to, and more we start to think, oh, this isn't anything big. I'm just going to go through the motions and get this done. And yet, that's what happened to Jesus. He shows up with his own, and has everybody looking at him. He could have given the best speech in the world, which apparently he did, because they're going, where did he get all this? And in the next breath going, yeah, but that's that Jesus character. I remember him when he was a kid. He was real, he made a lot of, he used to, bother everybody in the neighborhood. And isn't that the one that, used to, knock down cans? And wasn't he the one that, in that familiarity sometimes, all of a sudden, I can't accept that message. And yet what he said was beautiful because it moved them and it touched them. And our Christianity, our faith, is filled with beauty. And I believe that's what happened to that young man when he entered into St. Peter's. No words could have done what that beauty did. No words spoken. I've heard good preachers over the years, don't get me wrong. I could give I could stand here and talk for an hour, which I'm sure you would love if I did that. But again, I also realize too, that there has to be some beauty within that, but what's going to touch and move people the most is the beauty of Jesus Christ, the beauty of that encounter with Jesus Christ. A young man came up to me a little later and he says, I've been a Catholic all my life. I've been going through the motions. I haven't been convinced by it at all. And I just had an encounter with Jesus Christ. You walked into St. Peter's and had an encounter with Jesus Christ. And that is what changed him so radically. Through the beauty that was before him, he was changed. And his faith came alive. And he was so filled with it that even when we were at the airport and we were departing and saying goodbye, I could still see it within him. And how difficult it was for him to have to say goodbye to everybody. But the whole group had also undergone somewhat of a conversion through his conversion. That's the beauty at work in our midst. And so I encourage you, my dear brothers and sisters. I know that some of you have probably been coming into this church for 50 years. You've come in again and again and again, and you look at it and say, yeah, okay, that's nice. All right, let me go sit in my pew. I'd like for you, the next time you enter this building, to come into it like it's the first time you're entering it. Look around in wonder and awe. Look around at the beauty of the architecture in the sanctuary. Look at the beauty in the stained glass windows. And be moved once again, as you haven't been maybe for some time. Be pulled into the depth and the wonder and the awe that is Jesus Christ, that is God, that is our faith. And allow that to unleash your faith. Take it out of that cocoon, get out of that banality and that boredom, and allow your faith once again to be revived. In the coming weeks, Jesus is going to send those simpletons off. He's going to send them out with a message. He's not going to give them any long theological dissertations to go give. He's going to go say, preach the kingdom. And they're going to come back on fire. They're going to come back with a crowd. So look around you, my dear brothers and sisters, and be moved. Allow God to move within you. Allow the Spirit to overwhelm you. Allow the beauty of our faith to touch you. Allow yourself to encounter Jesus Christ himself. And that is what unlocks it. That's what unleashes it. And that's what frees you to go forth and to share that beauty with others. It's so incredible. You don't have to be an eloquent speaker to unleash your faith and share it with others. Just go forth and be a Christian. And that will touch others because the beauty that is within you will shine forth. And that beauty is Jesus Christ in you. Allow that to be unleashed in this society. Allow that to be unleashed in this community. Allow that to touch others. And this world will be renewed. This world will be replenished. And all will come to know that Catholicism isn't about a doctrine, it's about a person And that is expressed through beauty. God love you.